Hi, this is Darren from SimNation. Probably long overdue for this video. Recap of the draft and kind of grading the draft. The draft happened a few weeks ago for WWPF, which is our Draft Day Sports Pro Football 2024 League. I meant to do this video earlier, but of course I got COVID and have pneumonia, so it just didn't happen. Now, I want to enter this with full context. I'm going to be grading teams. Please don't take it personally if you're in the league. I have a couple harsh grades for some human coaches. I have some great grades for human coaches. But generally speaking, when I look at drafts, I look at what were your needs versus what you actually drafted. Did you improve your team? Did you get that generational player who's going to really make it really great for you? Um, for some teams, they completely traded out of the draft, and I'm gonna look at those trades as opposed to looking at what they drafted, Oakland being one. And then also for some teams, I am going to potentially grade you on what you gave away or what you didn't get as a result of trading out. So let's just dive right into it. I'm going to go alphabetically because I just don't want to. I gave probably, if I remember correctly, roughly about 6 A's. I think if I remember correctly, I gave roughly about 5 or 6 F's, and then everything in between. So we're looking at Arizona. Arizona's Dawn. Um, and let me just do this. So I liked some of Don's picks. Overall, I gave him a C minus. Most of the reason why is I disliked more of his picks than I liked his picks. The likes one, Jesse Payne, I think is a game changer. Yeah, he already has McDonald as his quarterback, but Jesse Payne is a really good quarterback, one of the like 4 or 5 in this draft. And I think that him picking him in the first round was a strong play. I didn't like really the following picks until about the fourth round when he picked Jadoby Strong. Jadoby Strong, again, I feel is going to be someone that's going to help him. He's a really good defensive tackle. I also liked Richard Pearson, who is a guard. Felt like he was one of the better guards in this draft. And to get him when he got him is really good. That's the last pick of the first, second to last pick of the fifth round. Um, so I really like that pick. I like John Schiller at cornerback. I think he's a serviceable one who will help him. Great pickup in the sixth round. I wasn't very big on Mansfield. I think that in the end, Mansfield is kind of a meh pick for me. And the main reason is I think he picked him too early. But having said that, he's going to be productive. He is a good pick. It's just to pick him in the first round, I think was a little bit too early. Aiden Hook, I'm not very good on Aiden Hook. There's not much like about him other than his hitting power. Jackson Hill, I felt like that's a miss. His speed is going to be a big issue, but he is a good blocker, so you can still work that in there. Um, Calhoun is a decent kicker, so and picking in the fifth round a kicker is not too high. I don't love the pick, but it's not a horrible pick either. It's actually a solid pick. McCulloch and Perrin, I'm not high on at all. So it's really a C to C minus. It's not a horrible one, but he did make some good picks that are going to help his team. Atlanta, this is an F. I hated Atlanta's pick. I even tried to help Atlanta, but again, because I had COVID, I wasn't able to. Um, and I missed something. So James Lester is not a horrible pick. It's not a great pick either. There were better defensive tackles available. I love Steven Sargent, but I hate the pick. He has too many centers, and it was a bad pick. Jacob Wong is a really good pick. He's one of the mini backs, and to get him in the third round was a good steal. Same with Nathaniel Wright. He's a really good linebacker, and to get him in the third round also was a good steal. Chester White was, it was a decent pick, not a great pick. But it at least was in line with where he needed to be. Swan Gomez was a good pick, but really that was it. And the biggest issue, well, Kelly Farrow was a good pick too. But the biggest issue I have with Atlanta is they really needed a quarterback. They didn't draft one until the seventh round, and Brent Charles is decent, but he's not great. They didn't change Vic Leroy Swanson is not a good guard, so that didn't help his offensive line where he needed a guard. He also needed a tackle. We didn't even address that. No wide receiver. He needed that. He needed a cornerback. Didn't get that. Needed a strong safety. So Atlanta missed on a lot. So they left this draft without improving the offensive line, receiver core, or secondary in the quarterback situation. So that gets them an F. Baltimore, I gave an A to. I think Kevin did a pretty good job with the draft considering what he had to work with. Where he didn't have his first two picks, he gave those up. But I like the pick of Ingle. I think Ingle is a really solid pick. It improves the Ravens quite a bit and gives him some weapons that he can use with Long, who's his quarterback. I like the pick of Mike Sharp. Again, he's fast. He's going to help with the speed that you see in the AFC North and just in the AFC in general. I didn't really like the pick of Garris. Garris is kind of just one-sided. But the reality is, I know a lot of people were high on Garris. I wasn't, but it's a solid pick, and I know why Kevin made it. Gene Hathaway is someone I'm pretty high on despite his stats. But I think he'll be a decent linebacker for him. I like the pick of Michael McCracken. Again, he gives Kevin a dynamic that's pretty good at quarterback, and you can develop him over time, and you've got time. It's a good backup for Long. Castle was a solid pick. Again, it's got good speed. I like the pick of DeLong. I think DeLong is going to be a pretty good all-purpose back. He also gives you a solid option up the middle. And then Gerald Bell is just a really good run stopper. So that's one of the reasons why I gave him an A. I think he hit most of what he needed to hit. Um, Buffalo, it's a solid B. Buffalo, again, did pretty well. And just keep in context is I was drafting when I could, and I didn't feel bad for the CPU to try to keep them from doing what they normally do, which is just pick one position and start drafting crazily for it. They needed guards, they needed a linebacker, they needed strong safety. I felt like that they improved the lines, got some depth at cornerback, but missed that linebacker and safety. So Anthony Chandler is a really, really good guard. He's a game changer, so really good fill. Rob Thurman didn't turn out as good as I thought he would, but he's strong, so we'll see how that plays out. Maybe give him some time. I like the pick of Keith Sawyer. I thought Keith Sawyer was good. I like the pick of Ian Whiteside, not just because he's from Maryland, but I think he's a solid guard. So Christopher Lewis was a really good, solid pick for a conference that has a lot of speedsters in it. And then the rest of the picks were okay. They weren't great, but overall it's a B. Um, Carolina, I felt was an A. I almost gave him an A plus. This is Invisible Witness. Invisible just has done a phenomenal job in the draft over the 3 seasons he's been here, which is why he's probably made it to the championship game. He had 4 picks. He nailed all 4 picks. Timothy Willis may go down as the best running back in this draft. He was a backup at Washington State to Merriman, who was also in this draft. And turns out that he's got ungodly agility. He's smart and he plays with speed. So this is a guy that's really gonna make some motion. And you could have argued that Invisible didn't need to grab a running back, but he saw him on the board and went after him, and that's one of the reasons why I gave him an A and thought about an A plus. Kenneth Ryan is a solid tackle. Probably was one of the better tackles in this draft. Maddox is a great wide receiver. To get him in the third round was a major steal. And then, of course, Joe Payne is just a solidly strong defensive end who can really go against the run. When you pick, like Carolina is, where you're at the edge of the draft almost every single time, you're picking for depth in a lot of cases in specialty. And I think that Invisible did a great job with that. Chicago, eh, Chicago's it's a D. I didn't really like Chicago's draft. I felt like it was good in the beginning and then it got progressively worse. I think the biggest problem with Chicago is they missed on a couple of things that they needed to get. They needed a guard. They drafted a tackle. They didn't get a strong safety. I like the pick of Orson Tron at quarterback. I think that he's going to be a really good one for Chicago, and gives them a game-changing quarterback. Tirado wasn't someone they needed, and candidly, he's not all that good. He's a great run blocker. I think he's a run blocker, yeah, but he's not anything else. Sparkman was a miss. Probably one of the worst tight ends in the draft. Clifford Young, anytime that you're saying that you did good at drafting a fullback, you know your draft sucked. Moyle, again, didn't really move the needle in maybe a few years, maybe. I love the name of Sincere Boren, and he's a good defensive end. It'll be interesting to see how he plays out, so I like this pick. But again, like Richard Clayton is a horrible guard, so just a D. It was not a good draft for Chicago. Cincinnati was one of the A teams. There was a lot to like about Cincinnati's draft, and I'm kind of not happy about it because I play in the AFC North with them. But they needed a couple different positions, but they largely filled out what they needed. They did miss on guard. That kept them from being higher. I felt like that they missed on tight end as well, but they didn't miss with linebacker, defensive tackle, defensive end, free safety. Battles is easily one of the best linebackers in the draft, so getting him was a major coup. Webber, he's a really good run stopper. So it's a good thing because Pittsburgh runs heavily, so does Baltimore, so does Cleveland. Highland was one of the steals in the draft. It was a great pick for Cincinnati, especially to get him where they got him in the second round. Griswold was a miss. Shavera was a miss. Neither of these two are really all that good. Jay Patterson is a good wide receiver, will help them. They need it. Charlie Barnum, I felt, was a good cornerback. Randy Kim is also another good run stopper. Forrest Tong is a good pass rusher. Coburn was a miss, but I mean, you're allowed that when you get into the sixth round. I really like this pick with Moreno. I think that he was the better of the tight ends that they drafted. So yeah, solid A for Cincinnati. Cleveland was a B plus for me. There were a couple things that kept them from being higher, but definitely Bio Eagle did a really good job here. So congrats, Bio. Um, so the thing that kept them from being an A was they missed on linebacker or defensive end. But I will tell you that while they missed, getting Antonio Newman was a major coup for them. Of course, they already had Sean Sparks, who was the quarterback from Marshall, but this was probably the top quarterback in the draft. They also got Thomas Moser, who only helps them against people like Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Same thing with Alan Kelly. Again, good speedsters. Aaron Coleman was a great pickup as well. Uh, Steve Lozano, meh. Uh, Juan Withwall, he's a really solid center and a good pickup in the sixth round. And then Manuel Taylor was largely a miss in the seventh, but it's definitely a B plus, and Bio did a really good job there. Dallas, this is one of those where it's going to be a little harsh. I felt like Dallas was a D minus trending towards an F. I didn't like a lot of their picks, but Templar's pretty seasoned, so he's maybe seeing something I don't. But for me, the only two good picks he had was James Cho, who's a solid, good possession wide receiver, and then Andrew Garza, who's a linebacker. The rest of the picks weren't great. Kirkwood is not a good defensive tackle. Morin. Now, Mayo, I think, is going to turn out to be a pretty good player. He is highly agile. Um, his speed isn't great, but if you're trying to stop the short passing game or having a box safety, he's a good pick. And he got him in the fifth round, so maybe more of a D plus now that I think about it. So But I think this didn't really improve Dallas as much as they needed to be improved in some areas, where they needed a tight end, they needed a cornerback, and they didn't address either of those two. Um, Denver is always an interesting one for me because they play in the AFC West with Oakland and Peter, and it's always hard to deal with them. So I think largely this is a case where I gave them a C minus because they missed on more picks than they hit. In a couple of the players, I really like the player, I just don't like the pick. You could argue that maybe it was a little bit too soon to be taking Haram Silva, but again, the guy is a highly accurate passer and he actually fits the system that Prince plays. Timothy Lay, uh, I don't know. I like the player, I just don't like the pick. Raymond Coates is a really solid pick. This was a good pick, especially if he's given some time to grow into the role. I didn't like Paul Sparks as a pick here. I think he's too slow. He doesn't give him anything. Uh, Canfield, he's probably the best punter in here and take him in the fifth round. It's not a bad play. McCloskey, I didn't love this pick, but I understand why. And I think that he'll give him a solid option against Peter and Peter's idea of running. William Saavedra, I didn't like this pick at all. So it's a C, C minus. Not a great draft, but he did pick up some really good players in Silva, Coates. And I do like the pick of Canfield. And McCloskey's kind of one of those specialty players. Uh, I gave Brian in Detroit an A minus. I think it was a really solid pick draft for him, especially since he didn't have a second and third round pick. McDougal alone makes this an A draft. He was one of the generational running backs that came out in this draft, as you can see why. He's a third all-time leading rusher in the SNCFL, behind Merriman, who was also in this draft. Um, I think from a perspective, I really like Alfred Webb. Uh, yeah, he's a little slow, but he is definitely the type of defensive tackle that he needs. I didn't like Christopher Johnson as much, but he's strong, and I think it's a good addition. Branham, I'm really high on. I think, again, if you're trying to stop the run, Branham's a great pick. I didn't like Orlando Schaefer, but you also got to bear in mind that Brian's picking in the seventh round. So all in all, to me, it was an A minus draft. McDougal makes an A plus, and then really John Johnson and Schaefer kind of pulled a little bit away from that. Green Bay. So this is, if I remember correctly, this is DWK. So all in all, I think Green Bay was a B plus. I liked the draft. I think that DWK did a lot of things to improve himself. I think in general, when you look at the NFC North, the teams in minus Chicago picked really well. Of course, Chicago's a CPU team. So the three humans were all, I think, if I remember correctly, A or B pluses. So that says a lot. Now, a lot of this is predicated on Stephen Hood, who is a generational talent. He moved up to get him, and that's just actually, I don't know if he moved up to get him, but it was just a great pick. This guy is off the charts. He probably could have been the number one pick if San Diego had went with Bittner. Nico Smith, I'm really high on Nico Smith, but I don't like the pick. Um, Mostly just because I think Nico could have been taken a little bit later. I like the pick of Kevin Graham. Um, he had to address tight end, but by this point in the third round, the four best tight ends had already left the thing. I like the pick of Victor Noah out of Georgia. I think that in time, this guy's going to be pretty good. He just needs some time to develop, and he's got a quarterback that he can let Noah develop behind. I like the pick of Kellum. I think in short passing routes, Kellum is going to be pretty good. Uh, I'm not as big a fan of Ferguson. I think you could have picked someone better in the seventh. So, um, all that said, Sorry, just looking at something real quick. Um, and then you have, if we move to Houston, um, Houston is JP, not to be confused with DP. So with Houston, it's a B draft. I mean, he had a really decent draft. He needed to improve at running back. I dinged him because he didn't. He needed to improve at guard. I dinged him because he didn't. He didn't get a tight end, and he didn't really fix his linebacker issue. He did try to fix the linebacker issue. It's just the two linebackers he got weren't all that good. But I think that Elmo Shaw is someone you don't pass up in the first round. I like the pick of Raul Coates. I think he's one of the better defensive ends. Like I said, I don't like the pick of Michael Dalton. I think that they were better at that draft pick. James Schaefer was a solid pick. Really good pick there, especially if he's trying to stop the run. Barrett Peterson was probably the best free safety on the board at the point that he was drafted. Again, Travis Rice, good thumper, but not very fast. Raphael Ball, sorry. I like this pick. I think that was a solid pick where he picked him in the seventh round. So yeah, B to B plus. He definitely needed some things and he went after them, which is kind of what you want to do where he was drafting. So overall, I think B to B plus. The next one up, I think, is Indianapolis. Now, in full transparency, this is Rick, the other Rick. We have two Ricks in our league. Um, in the case of this Rick, he was not here for the draft. So largely, I helped guide the CPU to try to help him. I like the pick of Larry Ventura. It's a really, really solid pick. By the way, Indianapolis is a B to B plus. Um, you could argue that he could have picked Willis, but Ventura showed up on the boards as the better of the two picks. Douglas Towns was the best tackle in this draft, so to get him definitely helped. Uh, the only place um, I think that keeps him from being an A is missing on linebacker and missing on guard. Adam Van, I didn't make this pick, by the way. This was done by the CPU. Not horrible, but not great. His speed is a liability. Ricci, great pick. Justin Adams is, I think, going to be a pretty decent quarterback over time, but needs some time to develop. And I think if I remember correctly, he's got time. Albert Banks was a great one. Bear in mind, Indianapolis is in the AFC South. So there's a lot of pass happy teams in that conference, so they got to deal with it. I love the pick of Julian Landry, who is exceedingly fast and over time should be able to grow into it. I do like this pick with Leonard Jin because, again, if you're playing him up near the line, that's a really strong play. Bud Negret is also another good one. And then I think Jeffrey Rodriguez was just a really solid pick to get in the seventh round. So all in all, it was a B to B plus. It was a good draft for Indianapolis. Jacksonville, I gave this one a C. It's not, again, a lot of this is subjective, but some of the picks that were made, I wasn't huge on. Like, I don't feel like Donald Field is one of the better ones, defensive ends, and I think where he was drafting, he could have got a better one. Jeffrey Beck, again, there was a much better tight end on the board at this point, actually maybe two, and kind of Starfinder missed on those. I do like the pick of Renfro. I think he was one of the better strong safeties in the draft. I like Jansen a lot. Jansen is a really solid back. The only concern with Jansen, of course, is his history of injuries. Same with Oglesby. Oglesby is a decent wide receiver. Roger Baker is a really good linebacker. And then, of course, when you pick in the seventh round, you want to pick for development. And I think Dirk Welker was a really good one. So I kind of dinged Starfinder a little bit for the earlier picks that he made, really the first, second, and fourth round. although I do think Oglesby is a little bit better than maybe I gave him credit for. But that's really what drove the C. But again, we'll see how it plays out because candidly, I could be dead wrong, and Starfinder has a funny habit sometimes of proving me to be wrong. So, Kansas City's up next. This is an F. So first of all, Kansas City CPU traded out of the first round for a lot of second rounders. They needed to improve guard and linebacker, and unfortunately, they overdrafted at center. And they missed on a lot of their picks. When you have that many second round picks, you should be able to walk away with some really good strength. I didn't like the pick of Jorgensen. I think that while he's got a good arm and he's smart, he's not the type of quarterback that they need. I really didn't like the pick of Hartman. I thought that was a wasted pick. So far, two wasted picks, right? Um, I did like Gore. I think Gore is a really good wide receiver. He's solid across the board. I'm not a big fan of Greenwood, but at the same time, I can understand why you choose him. His speed alone makes him attractive, but he kind of reminds me of Dwight Hand Left Stone. Mark Allen, he's solid and a good pick at 16. Again, there were some better players available around that time. Stanton Warren was a solid pick, probably one of the best strong safeties available at that time. So overall, I think when you come out of the second round, Jorgensen was a miss, Hartman was a miss, Greenwood was a miss, and then you had Warren, Allen, Gore, who weren't misses. But then when we get into the fourth round as well, and just into the later rounds, like Stackhouse was a miss. Um, Ellis wasn't, but Kansas City from a CPU perspective just missed on so many opportunities in this draft to get a lot better. I do really like the Chapman pick in the seventh round, but it was a missed opportunity, so I gave him an F because you can't miss that many times and expect not to be an F. Um, I do feel like Los Angeles, a lot of my rating here is going to be based on I felt like that they overdrafted at a position, and that normally will give me to give you a less than grade, but it's a B minus. It's not anything horrible. They also missed that strong safety. Norris Goldman is a good pick for them. As you can see, he's a very solid quarterback. He has injury issues. That's the only concern I'd have with him. Hildreth was a very solid pick for the second round. Mo was a very solid pick as well for the third round. And then the picks I really didn't like is a lot of the later round picks actually. I wasn't big on Kerry Kidd in the fifth round. I feel like he's solid but not great. But again, I probably should ease up on that. I'm going to give him a B because I just realized Kerry Kidd's actually probably better than I think. Johnny Muse was a wasted pick, but again, in the seventh round, you can't really ding somebody hard because they're picking. I liked the pick of Pedro East, so yeah, I'm going to give him a B instead of a B minus. Um, and by the way, Los Angeles, just so everyone knows, is Barry. Barry's a really good coach too. Um, Now, this next one, I kind of go back and forth on. Miami gave up pretty much all but one of their picks for this draft, and then they picked Johnny Galloway. I think Johnny Galloway is a B pick, uh, but when you look at the roster, there were a lot of people that they could have gotten better with. And I think the challenge that I have is had he kept the picks, he may have been better, but it's a C. Galloway's great, but he's not enough to really take Soa and Miami up higher, especially when you traded away all the picks. I'm not a big fan of trading away your picks. I think that hurts you in the long run. Um, Speaking of trading away picks, Rick at Minnesota, the other Rick did. He only had two picks. I gave him an A because he nailed them. Blackwell is arguably one of the better defensive ends in the draft, and O'Neal was arguably the best strong safety in the draft. So he improved his team and he got two really good players out of it. So just great job, Rick. Definitely worth an A. Um, New England, Shark is a really good coach. He does a good job in the draft. There wasn't a lot of need for him. Um, so this is a hard one for me to rate just because of the fact that he didn't really need much. Garris was a good pick at guard in the first round. I don't think it was a great pick. It was a good pick. Poland is a good pick as well. So I think his two line picks he did well with. I don't like Little at all, but I understand why he would pick Little due to the strength, the agility, and the tackling ability. He's a good gap linebacker. Dowling, I don't like this pick at all. But again, I also have to be careful with that. It's the seventh round, and arguably it's a really good seventh round pick for a tight end. So yeah, it's a B for Shark. He definitely filled some of the gaps he had, and he helped make his team better, which of course is not going to bode well for the rest of the AFC East. New Orleans, this is a D, mostly due to overstock and missing at cornerback. Um, I will tell you that this was a CPU team again. And a lot of times when I was able to pay attention, I was able to stop them from overstarking, but in some cases I couldn't. I really like Calhoun as a pick. I like Varela. I think he was actually probably the best tight end in the draft. Um, so first two rounds, Manis is a good pick for strong safety. He's a box safety. Wilmer Muir was another good pick. I don't like his hands, but he's good. But then he picked two tight ends in rapid succession, and that's why I started to lose it a little bit. Tony Molo is a good tight end. Don't get me wrong. Ralph Albrecht is a good wide receiver. But then Raymond Golden and Cleveland Haas are just both really bad. So, yeah, it wasn't a great draft, but it's maybe a C minus D. Mostly because a lot they didn't materially make the team better. Um, New York Giants. This is Cable. So I like this draft for Cable. He has Witten. He made some good moves. I gave him a B plus. The picks of Colton Atwell and Adam Bozeman in the late rounds, I didn't like those picks. In fact, I pretty much hated them. Uh, but all of his other picks were spot on. Wick, as you can see, is just the type of cornerback that you need to cover speed, and there's speed in the NFC East. Cassidy is one of the better free safeties in the draft. He traded for Pittsburgh to get Dawood Trevino. Pittsburgh traded him despite the speed because of the hands. I thought he was better, but I wasn't, so I was okay trading him. And for New York, this gives Witten another target, especially a fast one, because Witten has an ungodly arm. I like the pick of Matthew Ville, one of the better linebackers in the draft. I like the pick of Stephen Stanley. So again, he made really good picks. Jack Haggard is a good pick as well. So all in all, it was a B plus. Great job, Cable. The Jets. Jets gave away a lot of picks. So they gave away their first and second. Now, what I will tell you is I think that DP did a really good job with not having his first and second. Um, Traditionally, I would grade down, meaning that if he was a B, he's a C. But I think that one of the challenges he had is he didn't address the guard depth at guard tackle and I'm sorry, guard tight end and defensive tackle. But I will tell you, except for Earl Love, I really liked all of his picks. Um, Thad Runyon, one of the best free safeties. Dwight Ledford, one of the best guards. Or Love sucks. But again, he rated high, so I get why the pick was made. Hagel is a good linebacker, especially against the run. Robert McDaniel is a really good strong safety. So I'm going to give him a B, trending towards a B plus. It was a good draft for DP. I'm not going to ding him like I normally would for trading your first and second, just because I really can't. Now, Oakland, Oakland traded all their picks. Now, the reality is, I'm going to give him a higher grade only for one reason, if I can get this right. So, he traded all of his picks and got all the picks next year. So, that in itself is pretty good because he's going to enter next year with a ton of picks, and this is Peter, by the way. But he also improved his team by getting Raymond Sutton. So let me change the view here real quick. So trading to get Sutton was a huge deal because, as you can see, Sutton's a stud. So I that alone gives you an A. He also, if I remember, got I forget the dude's name now, but he picked up a. Well, I must have already dropped him. Um, but he got a whole bunch of picks in the 2051 draft. He picked up Sutton. That literally gives him an A. So it was just a shrewd move. Now I think Peter would have liked to gotten some of those picks back, only because I think he assessed this as being a weak draft, and there were some players that he probably would have wanted to get back. Um, this is also CPU with Philadelphia. They had all seven of their picks. Uh, Generally, I liked Philadelphia's. It's a B. Johnny Numbers was one of the two best tight ends in the draft. You can see why. That's really ungodly speed for a tight end. I like the pick of David St. Clair. I think they needed a quarterback. They got a pretty decent one. He's a game manager to boot, which helps them. Um, I also really liked Reed Metcalf. Again, just a really solid cornerback. I like both of these picks for the punter and the kicker. If Skelter was around, he's flipping in his grave because of that. What I didn't like was the pick of Richie Johnson. I think that was a wasted pick, but again, I get it. You got a really agile box safety essentially, and Edward Newcomb is just a bad pick. But the reason why I don't give them a higher grade than a B minus is because they didn't address their need at wide receiver. Pittsburgh's a C. Um, Pittsburgh's one of those teams that doesn't have a lot of need because between free agency and the draft, they traditionally do good. They did address one. They needed a tight end, and they arguably got probably the best tight end on the board at that point in Jeffrey Haynes. Um, they needed a quarterback. They didn't address that at all. That's what's driving the C, by the way. They got a decent development guard, which they would develop because some of the guards are getting older. And then again, they got a decent development tackle in Gray. Carlson, we'll see how that plays out. I don't think he's going to be on the practice squad, which means he'll get poached. And then Patton's a really strong Patton for the seventh round is a really good cornerback, and he'll be able to play in nickel packages for the Steelers. But it's a C for the Steelers. It wasn't a good draft. One of the A teams is definitely San Diego. Bittner alone makes this an A draft. This is a generational player, arguably one of the best players ever to come out of the SNCFL. He was, funnily enough, only played with Witten like for a season. Caleb Stein, another one of these really generational players with 99 speed. Jeremy Flores is the type of runner that you need to take pressure off of Bittner. Kilgore is a really decent cornerback. And then you got Jessup, who really isn't all that good. It's one of the reasons why they're not an A plus is people like Jessup weren't great picks. Um, but all in all, just Bittner alone, Flores, Dietz was a good one, Robinson. Really, the one pick I didn't like is I didn't like Jessup and I didn't like Irving, but that's not enough to take him out of an A. I would have liked to seen them address quarterback within that, and that's another reason why I gave him an A instead of an A plus. San Francisco, this wasn't a great draft for Stewart. And he's normally spot on. And he did make some really, really good picks in this. Uh, I felt like he missed in the later rounds. I felt like he missed in the second, which is what driving it. But Sheridan is easily one of the best offensive linemen in the whole draft, if not going to be a immediate day one starter. He absolutely nailed that one. Boone, if you're pass blocking, he's a great pick. If you're not, he's not as good. Khan is a really good pick for cornerback, especially in the third round. I felt like Cushman was a really solid tackle to pick, so I like those. And then I really didn't like any of the other picks that he made. Um, you was is a good backup to Sheridan. Roberts is decent but not great, especially when you're dealing with Spoof and others in that conference. So it's a C. It wasn't a horrible draft for him. It just wasn't his normal great draft. But again, with Sheridan and Cushman, he's got some really good linemen. Um, Seattle, this one will be a little controversial because I think in some places Spoof acts exactly nailed it. In some places, I don't think he nailed it. Now, Merriman going Hill when you have Frank, who was drafted a few seasons ago, you could make an argument, but again, Merriman's a generational player. You can see the strength, the agility, the speed, the hands. He's a second all-time leading rusher, the first in rushing attempts. The dude literally held up, never missed a game, is the type of running back you want to have, especially if you want him to run through a wall. So this was a really good pick in my eyes, even though he has already arguably a pretty good running back. Um, I wasn't as high on some of the other picks, and I don't like the pick of Frank Sharp. Again, I think Frank Sharp is decent, but picking him in the first round, I think that was a miss. Mitten is definitely a first round talent, made his line better. I think Bruce Ferguson, maybe a third rounder, but not a second rounder, but still a good pick. Ruiz, I felt like was a much better pick in the second round and definitely worth it. Shane Damon, not that great of a pick. Felix Smallhorn, I like this pick. This was actually one of the things that helped me bump him up to a B. Uh, and then, of course, you had Devin Inman, who's another really solid. He really improved his receiver core in this draft. Irvin Hoy, not a really good pick, unless you're going to be playing him a lot short. And then I felt like a lot of these other picks were just misses. But I mean, Merriman alone takes you to a B plus. Add in Mitten, add in Ferguson, add in Ruiz, add in Lawhorn and Inman, and it's a solid B. It was a good draft for Spoof. He built depth and he also got some really game changing options. It'll be interesting to see what he does with, I think it's Frank, but Merriman is definitely just someone that a large part of the time you're not going to pass on. Um, Tampa Bay is a C. They are in a situation where they'll overstart that running back. So I don't know why the CPU took two running backs. They missed on tight end and they needed a defensive end and they failed to get it. But outside of that, I mean, a lot of their picks were solid choices for the position. Like Keeling was arguably one of the better wide receivers in the draft. Sharp is a really good cornerback, especially if you're playing in the NFC South. Mark Hill, again, a decent pick, right? But Wilcox and Tong are wasted on this team because there's so many running backs on this team. Parson, I like this pick. I think it improved the line. Spellman, I like this pick because I think, again, it proved his secondary. But he just missing out on the tight end and the defensive end, I think is definitely going to come back to haunt the Tampa Bay, who is a CPU team, by the way. Tennessee, uh, I really liked what Tennessee did. So this is Bama. Uh, I think it was just a really solid draft for him. I love the pick of Harold Bird. Whether it's Battle or Bird, really strong linebacker pick, right? I like the pick of Levy. He is one of the better centers in the draft. Getting him in the second round was a huge deal. I really like getting Hart. I thought Hart was one of the better players in this draft. Um, I think I could go through all of his picks and I could just tell you that they're really good. The only pick I didn't like was when you got to the seventh round. But again, this is a seventh rounder and he's got great hands, right? So I gave him an A minus. I feel like Bama did a great job in this draft. So definitely good job. Washington, the last team, Hill. Um, I think this is a B minus for Washington. Kelly Lerner is a really decent defensive tackle. He's a bull rusher, so he's going to throw people around. I really liked Edgar Varela. I thought he was one of the better wide receivers in this draft. Um, I think that I like Giovanni May. Sorry. Again, solid pick here, especially if you're defending against short passing routes, which they do in the NFC East. Chris Mackey was another good draft pick. Really, what kept him from being an A was I don't like the pick of Stovall. He's not a very good punter. I thought that there was a better punter available at that spot. And again, that's me nitpicking, right? I don't like the pick of Sims. I think, again, you could have found someone better. But it's a great pick for Udo, and I think he did really well. So if you look at it, we had some really good picks this time around. Will Carolina, Cincinnati, Minnesota, San Diego, Detroit, Baltimore, um, Tennessee really differentiated themselves on the top end, and then you had Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, Kansas City, uh, who scratched Miami, but Dallas, Atlanta, Kansas City really didn't differentiate themselves on the other side. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this draft as to who's going to be the real big game changer. I think if you look at it, McDougal, Merriman, Willis are three people to watch. Bittner's definitely someone to watch. The only problem I worry about with Bittner is I still don't think San Diego has anyone really to get the ball to him. And then, of course, you got to watch out for Oakland because while they didn't draft anybody, they did get Bettle because of the pick for Sutton. And they have all those picks next year, which is something that is dangerous for Peter. Now, when we look to next year's draft, um, it's going to be an interesting draft. There is a generational player in Asa Garcia, who is actually healthy for the first time. And if Asa stays healthy, then it's going to get really interesting really quick because he is probably he is a Witten type quarterback. And even though we are going to implement a new skill, I don't think anything would impact Asa that strongly. He's just that good. Another running back to keep an eye out for is Alejandro LaFleur, who's out of Michigan. He is very much a solid runner. He's ran for 6,000 yards. He's ran twice for over 2,000 yards. He comes out of Stewart's Michigan program, and he's just a guy you want to keep an eye on. Ashby is another guy out of Louisiana Monroe. Reginald Ashby, not as fast, but more agile. Um, and he's on pace right now to potentially become the third all-time rusher in the league. Of course, which would be ironic because the all-time leading rusher for the SNCFL is from Louisiana Monroe, which was Bynum. But I don't think he's going to be able to get enough to get past Merriman. He may get enough to get past McDougal, but he's still got to work a little bit harder. There are a couple wide receivers just to keep an eye on. So as we get closer to that draft, if Tony Hamilton out of Florida State comes out, he's going to be pretty good. I think the other ones, a lot of the wide receivers are actually underclassmen. So it should be interesting to see how that all plays out. And then on the defensive side of the ball, there are some really good defensive players who may be coming out. Um, it'll be interesting to see if James Gunter does, who's right now leading the league in interceptions. Another person to keep an eye on is what is his name? The kid from UCLA. Uh, I, never mind. I'll have to look it up. But there's some good players. It's just we're going to implement a scale that's a little bit more of a bell curve, which is going to change some of it because we got to equalize. But all in all, it was a good draft. I definitely like how people drafted, and I'm excited to see the upcoming season. I'll do a preview next weekend for that, or right before the season starts on Friday. Sorry, I forget it starts on Friday. But if you have any questions, let me know, and I apologize for rambling. This is a little bit longer video than I expected, so I do apologize.